I remember the first time my older brother Damien made me feel small. I was only 8 and he was 10. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and our mom had just finished baking chocolate chip cookies. Damien took one look at my small glass of milk, then at his taller one, and smirked. "Looks like I'm bigger than you in every way," he teased. At that moment, I felt I would never measure up to his standards. Even as kids, Damien believed he was destined for greatness. He always had the newest sneakers and bragged about how he'd buy a mansion someday. If I mentioned any of my smaller dreams, like wanting a treehouse or a cool science kit, he'd roll his eyes. Our parents tried to treat us equally, but it was clear Damien loved showing off. His confidence rubbed off on teachers and neighbors, who praised him for his ambition. I didn't hate him. I envied him maybe, but mostly I felt left behind. I was quieter and often got lost in my own thoughts. Whenever I tried to share ideas about things I loved, like writing stories or learning about different cultures, he'd make a snide remark, "You'll never make it big thinking small." He was just 2 years older, but the gap seemed huge. It was my first taste of sibling rivalry, and it stung deeper than any playground insult. Little did he know, the seeds of my future success were already quietly taking root. I vowed silently that one day I'd prove I wasn't someone to underestimate. During our teenage years, my parents often found us at odds. Damien liked to show off his latest accomplishments. One day it was his basketball trophy, the next it was his near-perfect test score. I was happy for him, but I was also drowning in his shadow. He acted like he was the family prodigy, and everyone bought into that idea, especially our relatives. One night, after Damien told me I should try harder, I stayed up late in my room, reading and jotting down my own goals. I wanted to find success on my own terms, not by matching his bragging rights. I dreamed of seeing the world, building something meaningful, and being free from the pressure of constant comparison. That summer, I got my first taste of independence. I saved money from a part-time job at a local bookstore, carefully stacking dollar bills into an old coffee tin. Damien teased me, saying, "Only losers work for minimum wage. You'll never get rich that way." But I wasn't just working for money. I was learning how business worked, how people interacted, and how books revealed powerful knowledge. Though our parents tried to keep the peace, Damien's dismissive remarks continued. Quietly, I found strength in my small achievements. Every paycheck and every new skill felt like a step toward a larger dream. He might have thought I was beneath him, but I was starting to see I had the power to chart my own path. When it was time for Damien to pick a college, he boasted he'd get into the best business school. He walked around the house waving acceptance letters, like awards he had personally invented. My parents looked proud, and he wanted everyone to know it. By the time I was applying for schools, Damien's bragging hit a peak. He'd drop hints that some people should aim lower, implying I wasn't ready for a top university. I ended up at a decent college, not as famous as his, but one I truly liked. Damien called it second-rate. Yet, within my first month, I discovered new ideas and made friends who pushed me to think bigger. My roommate was majoring in finance and introduced me to real estate investing basics. I was mesmerized by how property markets worked, how deals were made, and how fortunes could be built steadily over time. While other students went to football games, I spent weekends reading about successful real estate strategies. When I tried to share this excitement with Damien during a holiday dinner, he barely looked up from his phone. "You? Real estate?" he scoffed. "Don't kid yourself." His dismissive attitude stung, but it also ignited a spark. In that moment, I decided I wasn't going to talk much about my plans anymore. I would let my future actions speak for me. The summer after my sophomore year, I took a small leap. Using some scholarships and savings, I invested in my first tiny property, a rundown studio apartment near campus. People thought I was crazy, including Damien, who laughed out loud when I mentioned it. He said, "That's hardly a property empire. It's a dump." But I saw potential in that little studio. The location was good, and with some elbow grease, I could fix it up. I spent weeks painting walls, replacing old fixtures, and finding budget-friendly ways to improve the place. My best friend helped me with basic repairs, and we celebrated when I finally rented it out to a student willing to pay a modest monthly sum. After covering costs, I barely made a profit of a couple $100 each month. But that small gain felt like a triumph. It was proof that if you handle real estate right, it can grow into something larger. When Damien saw I was serious, he taunted me more. "One studio apartment doesn't make you a success," he sneered. I kept silent, let him mock me. I wanted to learn everything I could about expanding little investments into something bigger. That studio became my tiny stepping stone, but it also lit an inner fire. I sensed I was onto something that could change my life. Not long after, Damien decided to buy a condo with financial help from our parents. He boasted endlessly. "Now that's a real property," he would say, glaring at me. "I'll stop wasting money on rent." At every family gathering, he made sure to mention his mortgage and how it was more responsible than renting. He even hinted I should move in with him, at a high cost, of course, so I could learn how real adults handle business. What he didn't realize was that renting was actually liberating for me. I didn't want to sink all my money into a single home. I needed flexibility. Renting let me put my savings toward investments, not a down payment on a house I might be stuck in for decades. Yet in Damien's eyes, I was just throwing money away. He saw me as too poor or too scared to buy a home. At times his words stung. In front of extended family he'd say, "My brother's still renting, poor soul," while shaking his head in mock pity. Relatives would give me concerned looks and I'd force a smile. I was saving, learning, and exploring property deals behind the scenes, but I kept quiet. If Damien wanted to think renting was pathetic, I'd let him. My ambition was different. I wanted financial freedom, not just a mortgage. By the time I graduated college, I had studied as much as I could about real estate. I spent hours dissecting market trends, reading books on how to leverage capital, and networking with mentors who saw the big picture. I didn't have a trust fund, but I had determination. Through some serious hustle, I found small investment groups and private lenders who believed in my research. Slowly, I began to invest in multiple small properties, studios, one-bedroom units, and even a duplex here and there. All the while, Damien kept needling me about growing up and buying a real house. He'd post photos of himself in front of his condo on social media, writing captions like, "Homeowner pride, some people will never experience this." He never named me directly, but the implication was obvious. Despite his jabs, I noticed that his condo wasn't appreciating in value as fast as he hoped, and he was also dealing with repairs and property taxes. On the flip side, my rentals started providing more and more income. Each deal was modest, but collectively, they began to add up. I learned to keep my mouth shut, let Damien brag in public. I preferred letting my portfolio grow quietly. My circle of confidants was small, and I made sure no one in the family knew the scale of my investments. It felt almost exciting to keep it a secret. One day, I would make him eat his words. Our parents tried to keep the peace, but gatherings became more uncomfortable. Damien would walk in wearing expensive suits, flaunting a new watch or a fancy gadget. He often boomed about his condo's new decor or the next big promotion at work. He had a knack for making me feel like a bystander in our own family home. "Still renting?" he'd say, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know, you're never gonna get rich that way. Mom and Dad didn't teach you better?" He chuckled, and I could see some relatives nodding in agreement. It was humiliating, but I stayed polite, simply saying, "Renting suits me for now." I refused to engage in a full-blown argument. All the while, he enjoyed playing the role of the successful older brother. I remember one Thanksgiving especially well. At the dinner table, he bluntly called me pathetic. Our mother's face fell, but she remained silent, not wanting to escalate the drama. I looked down at my plate, both angry and determined. The tension was so thick, you could slice it with a butter knife. I decided in that moment that when I revealed what I was truly worth, it had to be the perfect moment. For now, I'd just keep grinding in private. My routine became almost obsessive. By day, I worked a regular job to keep appearances normal, and by night, I was analyzing real estate deals, attending online seminars, and calling property managers. Each new property was like a puzzle piece. I had no time for shopping sprees or flashy vacations, and Damien ridiculed me even more for that. "Why don't you spoil yourself?" he'd say. "You'll never get anywhere pinching pennies." But my efforts started paying off faster than even I expected. With careful budgeting, I was able to buy small apartment buildings in up-and-coming neighborhoods. Each month, I saw my rental income increase. My obsession was paying off, but I stayed under the radar. I didn't post about it, didn't brag, and never changed my modest lifestyle. I still rented the same basic apartment and drove a second-hand car. Sometimes I wanted to scream, "I'm not pathetic, I own more property than you can imagine." But I kept my cool. Damien's condescending words were fueling my determination. Every time he insulted me, I thought about the next deal, the next property, the next chance to grow. The more he belittled me, the stronger my resolve became. I was building an empire, brick by brick, and he had no clue. Over time, I formed partnerships with silent investors who appreciated my data-driven approach. We pooled resources to acquire commercial spaces, multifamily units, and even small shopping centers. It all started from that single studio apartment near my college. Now the scope of my properties was growing exponentially. I remember standing on the rooftop of a newly acquired commercial building one evening, watching the city lights. I felt humbled and excited. I often thought about how different my path was from Damien's. He was so busy showing off his superficial success, fancy clothes, luxury car loans, and a single condo he treated like a palace, that he failed to notice I owned entire blocks of rental units. Occasionally, I questioned if I should share my progress with my parents, but Damien's constant insults made me want to protect my secret. I wanted the reveal to be a moment they'd never forget. My family saw me as a meek renter with no direction, and maybe that was to my advantage. People often underestimate those who keep a low profile. Behind the scenes, my net worth climbed. I wrote down a personal goal. One day, I want my properties to be worth hundreds of millions. A ridiculous dream? Maybe to Damien, but to me, it was becoming a very real target. Damien's wedding was a huge, showy event. He married a woman who came from money, and the ceremony felt like a big social competition. Everyone showed off their designer outfits, and Damien made sure to mention how much everything cost. The venue was a huge ballroom. The tables were covered in rare flowers, and even the wedding cake had edible gold flakes. I attended in a simple suit. I could afford something much fancier, but I chose not to. As soon as I walked in, Damien smirked. "I almost thought you'd skip because you couldn't afford a gift," he said, half joking. People around us laughed awkwardly, not sure if he was serious. I shrugged it off, handing him a small box with a tasteful present. In truth, I could have bought him something that would dwarf all the other gifts combined, but I didn't want to feed his ego. During the reception, he gave a speech about how he was proud of his accomplishments, how he bought a home at a young age, and how he was financially set. "My brother is still renting, but maybe one day he'll join me in real success," he joked in front of everyone. People laughed, some uncomfortably. I merely sipped my drink, holding on to my secret. This was just another test of my resolve to wait for the perfect moment to show the truth. After the wedding, I poured myself even deeper into my projects. I upgraded the management of my properties, hiring professionals and building a trusted team. By doing so, I had more time to look into lucrative deals in other cities. I learned how to assess neighborhood potential, negotiate fiercely, and time the market to my advantage. Each major purchase felt like a victory over Damien's taunts. My new partners and I landed deals on apartments near tech hotspots and hotels near popular travel destinations. I worked out lease agreements with businesses that provided stable, long-term income streams. It was strategic growth, and it was exhilarating. Still, Damien's mocking continued. He loved to gather the family and brag about how he had the best credit score or how he refinanced his condo at a great rate. I let him enjoy the spotlight. Every time he showed off, I calmly reminded myself of the properties filling my own portfolio. Family members would ask if I had plans to buy a home soon, but I'd reply vaguely, "I'm comfortable where I am." They pitied me, thinking I was behind in life. Little did they know, I was finalizing the purchase of multiple luxurious properties, each worth more than Damien's entire net worth. But the time to reveal wasn't right yet. I wanted it all to build up to a moment so undeniable that Damien wouldn't have a single smug word to say. Damien's so-called perfect life started to show some cracks. He took on expensive projects around his condo, racking up loans and credit card debt. He kept up his flashy lifestyle, fancy dinners, designer suits, lavish trips, thinking it would impress everyone. But behind the scenes, it drained his bank account. He rarely admitted it, but I caught hints of stress in his voice when he talked about money. He'd complain about rising property taxes or condo association fees. Yet whenever anyone asked how he was doing, he'd say, "Fantastic, making big moves," and quickly changed the subject. At the same time, my portfolio was growing more stable. I used the rental income to pay down my small loans and reinvest profits. My properties practically paid for themselves, generating wealth each month. It felt surreal, thinking back to when I was just a college kid with one studio apartment. Despite this, Damien still acted like he was above me. At a family barbecue, he loudly declared, "Being a homeowner is the only way to real success. Renting is for those who can't plan for the future." Everyone looked at me with that familiar pity. I smiled and said nothing. Inside, I felt a stirring sense of satisfaction, knowing how wrong he was, and how soon he would find out. One afternoon, out of the blue, Damien called me. It was rare for him to reach out unless he had something to brag about. I answered, expecting some new boast about his condo renovations. Instead, his tone was strangely humble. "Hey," he said, "I need some advice. You work in real estate, right?" He stumbled over his words like he'd never actually paid attention to what I did. He told me he was thinking of selling his condo. He was frustrated with the mortgage, the fees, and the upkeep. The economy seemed uncertain, and he wasn't sure if it was a good time to sell. "I know you rent," he said condescendingly, "but I figured you might know something about the market." I listened, offering basic tips without revealing too much. My heart pounded a bit. This was the first time Damien acknowledged I might actually have real knowledge. When he realized I understood market trends, his tone softened. "I appreciate your input," he said. "Maybe you're not so clueless after all." It wasn't exactly an apology or a compliment, but it was the closest thing I'd heard. Despite his rudeness, I felt a pang of sympathy. He was struggling, even if he'd never admit it fully. But I didn't let on that I was more experienced than he thought. I gave him neutral advice, leaving him still in the dark about the size of my investments. I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Word traveled fast among friends and acquaintances that I had a knack for real estate. A few old classmates reached out to me for advice on buying or renting. Damien caught wind that people started seeing me as a property-savvy person. He felt confused. "Why are they asking you for help?" he blurted one day. "You don't even own a house." I just shrugged, keeping my secrets close. But the rumors grew. People in our extended social circle began to suspect I was more successful than I let on. I never confirmed anything, but I occasionally hinted I had a few properties. Some folks saw me driving out of certain neighborhoods they knew had valuable commercial spaces. As the whispers spread, Damien's curiosity began to spike. He'd randomly ask, "Have you thought about buying your own place yet?" with a touch of nervousness in his voice. A small part of me wanted to laugh. Here was my older brother, the same guy who called me pathetic, now peering into my life with a new kind of respect. Or was it concern? Either way, I kept my portfolio a well-guarded secret. I wanted my success to be undeniable by the time Damien realized the truth. I dreamed of the day I'd show the magnitude of my holdings. But for now, the rumors swirling around me only fueled my ambition, ensuring I stayed focused on expanding what I had built. My life felt like a double existence. To most of the family, I was the quiet sibling with no property to my name, still renting that same modest apartment. But behind closed doors, I was signing multi-million-dollar deals and growing a network of investors. I sensed a major milestone approaching. If I combined everything I owned, apartment buildings, commercial units, vacation, rentals, and potential new projects, the total value was inching closer and closer to $750 million. At times, the scale of it stunned even me. I thought back to that tiny studio apartment and how it all started. I had always believed in the long game. Where Damien saw quick wins and flashy status, I saw steady income streams and potential for bigger returns. Late one night, I sat at my desk, going over the numbers. I realized I was just one or two big deals away from crossing that $750 million threshold in property value. My heart pounded with excitement. I knew that once I reached that mark, there would be no question. I was no longer the pathetic renter Damien believed me to be. But how would I reveal this? I decided to wait for an opportune moment, a confrontation or a gathering where my brother's arrogance would be at its peak. That's when I'd unveil the truth. Despite our quiet period of cautious respect, Damien's smug behavior never fully went away. At a friend's birthday party, he cornered me as we stood by the buffet. "I heard some people think you're an expert in real estate," he said, voice dripping with skepticism. "But renting isn't exactly expertise. Don't let them fool you." I kept my composure. "I read a lot," I replied calmly, "and I learn from those who've done well." His lip curled slightly, as though he doubted every word. Then, with that old snide grin, he said, "Maybe you should invest in something real, like an actual house. Stop hiding in that cramped apartment." His words were cruel, but a small voice inside me whispered, "He's going to regret this." Because by this time, I had deals closing in other states, a management team overseeing properties in busy tourist areas, and a new contract that would push my total real estate portfolio over a massive benchmark. I thought about telling him everything right there, but I held back. If there was anything I had learned all these years, it was timing. The moment wasn't right. A bigger stage was coming. "Sure," I said, forcing a polite smile, "I'll think about it." Inside, I was already planning a reveal that would silence Damien's insults once and for all. Finally, it happened. After months of negotiations, I closed a deal on several high-end vacation properties with steady tourist demand. This acquisition tipped my total property value over $750 million. I felt an electric rush when I saw the final papers. My name, alongside my partner's, was on the deeds to resorts that drew visitors year-round. Even in my wildest dreams, I hadn't imagined I'd reach this point before turning 40. I celebrated quietly with my closest confidants, friends who had been there from the beginning. We toasted with simple glasses of sparkling juice, skipping the fancy champagne. I liked the symbolic contrast: big success, humble celebration. One of my partners asked, "So are you going to tell your family now?" I nodded slowly, a determined gleam in my eye. "Soon," I said. "I'm just waiting for the right moment." I could already envision Damien's face when he learned I wasn't just comfortable, but incredibly wealthy by any measure. The thought gave me chills, not out of spite, but out of pure anticipation for that sigh of relief. I had worked tirelessly to prove I was more than just the younger sibling overshadowed by Damien's ego. Now, with a real estate empire worth $750 million, the truth would be explosive. My parents planned a family reunion for the first time in years. Extended relatives, cousins, and family friends were all invited. Damien, of course, offered to host it at his condo, flaunting how spacious it was. I accepted the invitation, seeing it as a prime opportunity. If Damien decided to show off again, this time, I'd be ready. The day arrived. The living room buzzed with chatter as people mingled, sipped drinks, and admired Damien's decor. Before long, he launched into his usual speech about the importance of homeownership. "Renting," he announced to the group, "is like lighting money on fire every month." A few older relatives nodded, sharing his belief. Then Damien glanced at me. "My brother is still renting, no offense," he said, "but it's never too late to grow up." I felt a burning sensation in my chest, part nerves, part anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. Everyone turned to look at me. I could see pity in some eyes, confusion in others. A hush fell over the room as if they were waiting to hear my excuse. Damien smirked, completely unaware of the storm about to break. I decided enough was enough. I took a deep breath and prepared to speak. My heart pounded, but I was ready to claim my truth at last. I cleared my throat. "Damien," I said calmly, "you've always mocked me for renting. But there's a reason I never bought a single-family home." His smug grin wavered slightly, but he still wore an air of condescension. "Oh?" he replied. "Enlighten us." I looked around at everyone, the aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. Then, in a steady voice, I explained, "I've spent my adult life investing in real estate, apartment complexes, commercial properties, vacation rentals. It started with a tiny studio in college, and now, all combined, my properties are worth around, well, $750 million. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Damien's smirk vanished as if wiped away by a gust of wind. He tried to laugh it off, saying, "You're joking, right?" But the stunned faces of our relatives told him otherwise. My mother and father looked at me with wide eyes, too shocked to speak. "I'm not bragging," I continued softly. "I just want you to know that renting wasn't a sign of failure. It was a strategy. It gave me the freedom to invest in properties that have made me, quite frankly, very wealthy. I didn't say anything before because I didn't feel the need to prove myself. But after all the insults, I thought it was time you knew." You could have heard a pin drop after my revelation. Damien's face went pale. His mouth hung slightly open, eyes blinking as if he couldn't process the information. For years, he'd played the role of the successful older brother, ridiculing me in front of everyone. Now the tables had turned so dramatically he seemed lost for words. A cousin finally broke the silence. "Wait, did you say $750 million? Others chimed in with exclamations, questions, stunned laughter. My parents rushed to me, their voices tangled in disbelief and pride. "You did all this?" my mother asked, tears glistening in her eyes. "You never told us?" I nodded, feeling both relieved and vulnerable. All my secrecy, the quiet nights studying property deals, the hidden bank accounts, the hush-hush approach, everything led to this moment. I looked at Damien, searching his expression for a hint of understanding, but he seemed locked in shock. He muttered, How is this possible?" The arrogance was gone, replaced by a confused sort of hurt. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the years of insults, the sneering remarks, the public humiliation. This was the justice I had waited for, not revenge exactly, but a hard lesson for him. Actions do have consequences. Damien's wife approached me, a strained smile on her face. "Congratulations," she said quietly. I had no idea. Others crowded around, offering congratulations, stunned admiration, or cautious curiosity. The entire gathering became a swirl of emotions. Some people were thrilled for me, some were suspicious, and a few, like Damien, were shell-shocked. For a moment, I felt guilty. Was I showing off now, just like he had always done? But then I remembered. I hadn't planned to boast. I was simply defending myself. I deserved to stand in my truth after so many years of being belittled. My father, a proud man, took me aside. "Son," he said, voice shaking with emotion, "why didn't you tell us?" I shrugged, blinking back tears. I just wanted to build it without expectations or pressure. He hugged me, and I felt a wave of relief that at least he understood. Meanwhile, Damien hovered near the kitchen counter, staring at nothing. Friends tried to talk to him, but he gave half-hearted answers. It was as though his carefully constructed identity as the successful sibling had shattered. I wondered if this might break our relationship for good, but at the same time, I felt a certain inner peace. After all those years, I finally felt seen. In the days following the reveal, everyone had questions. Family members called, asking for real estate tips. Old friends texted out of the blue, congratulating me and apologizing for doubting me. Even my parents, who had always cared for us equally, began treating me with a new kind of respect. It was odd. I still felt like the same person, just one who had been working in the shadows. Damien, however, went silent. He didn't text or call. At first, I thought he might be busy. Then I realized he was probably struggling to cope with the news. For years, he had flaunted his condo, believing it made him superior. Now he knew his younger sibling was in a whole different league financially. A part of me wanted to reach out to him to see if he was okay. Another part of me remembered all the times he tore me down without mercy. Should I forgive and forget? Or should I let him stew in the reality of my success? In the end, I decided to give him space. He needed time to process that the pathetic renter he mocked was actually a multimillionaire landlord many times over. I felt a new sense of calm settling in. My path had always been about quietly building something real. Whether he wanted to accept it or not, I had found my true success on my own terms. A week later, Damien finally reached out. He sent a text that read, "We need to talk." I agreed to meet him at a cafe we both used to visit as teenagers. When I arrived, I found him already seated, his shoulders tense. He looked up and gave me a weak smile. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling. I was just so sure that buying a house was the only way to be successful. That's how I saw it. I thought you were wasting your time. And now..." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I'm honestly in awe, and I feel like a fool." It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from him in years. I didn't sense any sarcasm or bitterness. I offered him a gentle nod. I accept your apology, I replied softly. But I didn't build all this to prove you wrong. I did it because I believed in a different path. He sighed, gazing into his coffee. I guess I just like being the successful one. It gave me identity. Now I don't know who I am. His vulnerability surprised me. We talked for an hour about our different choices, our pride, and our regrets. I left feeling hopeful but cautious. We had a lifetime of tension behind us. Healing wouldn't be instant. As time passed, people adjusted to the knowledge of my real estate empire. Some acquaintances treated me differently, as though I'd magically become more interesting. It felt strange and a bit unsettling. Meanwhile, Damien made efforts to change his life. He downsized some of his expenses and stopped boasting about his condo. We even started having civil conversations about business and investing. At one family dinner, Damien admitted his mistake in front of everyone. I was wrong to call my brother pathetic, he said, voice wavering. I let my ego run wild. Renting, buying, owning, those are just tools. What really matters is how you use your resources. He shot me a glance that held genuine respect. I nodded, grateful but still maintaining healthy boundaries. I realized the moral of our story wasn't just about money. It was about understanding that success doesn't fit one single mold. Some people find security in owning a home, others find freedom in renting and investing. At the end of the day, it's about living your own truth. If I had caved under Damien's insults, I might never have built the empire I have now. And if he hadn't been so arrogant, perhaps he would have started exploring new paths sooner. We never fully returned to being the close, carefree brothers we were as children. Too much had happened, too many harsh words spoken. Yet there was a new understanding between us. Damien and I could share a meal without him belittling me, and I no longer felt the need to hide my achievements. Our relationship didn't become perfect, but it found a more balanced footing. I stayed in my rented apartment by choice. I could buy a mansion, 10 mansions if I wanted, but I liked the simplicity and flexibility. My real estate portfolio continued to grow, but I kept my lifestyle calm and understated. After all, I had nothing left to prove. The greatest victory for me wasn't the money. It was the moment I stood up for myself in front of everyone who ever doubted my path. The shock on Damien's face was priceless, yes, but the real reward was reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. I had finally demonstrated that true success isn't about flashy appearances or one-size-fits-all ideas. It's about the courage to do things your own way. And so, my brother called me pathetic for renting, but he fell silent when he discovered my $750 million real estate portfolio. In that moment, I learned that validation comes from within, and that sometimes staying quiet until the right moment is the best strategy of all.